Good morning. Welcome to Grover Hill Zion United Methodist Church here at 204 South Harrison Street here in Grover Hill. We're glad you're viewing. We hope this message will be helpful to you. And of course, you're more than welcome to come and be with us in the sanctuary at 10:30 on Sundays or any other time we have some activities going on. This week we've got a new project started. You can see they've removed the stained glass window on the south side of the church, and they're going to strengthen it and shore it up and clean it a little bit, and then they'll be doing the one on the west side of the building as well. So it's really something to see is happening as well. Well, there was once a very old and a very wise man. And every day he just sat at a gas station. Remember, we used to do that. Remember the old-time gas stations? It was kind of a gathering place for everybody. Well, this man sat outside in a rocking chair, just rocking and greeting motorists as they entered the gas station and left. And one day his little granddaughter joined him and sat down at the bottom of the rocking chair. And they were just chatting. And one day a man stopped in, and he got out of his car and he went into the gas station. He was a very tall man. You know, very tall tourist. Looked like he meant business, you know. And since Grandpa and his granddaughter knew just about everybody in town and began looking around as if he were checking the area out for a place to live. And this tall stranger asked Grandpa, he said, "What kind of town is this like anyway?" And Grandpa said, "Well, where are you from?" And he said, "Well, in the town that I'm from, everyone is very critical of each other. All the neighbors gossip about each other. It's a very negative place, and I'm glad we're getting out of there. We're looking for a more cheerful place, a happier place." And Grandpa, rocking in his chair, looked up at the stranger and said, "You know what? That's just kind of how this town is." Well, an hour or so later, another family pulled up at the gas station, went inside. The mother and her two children went inside, and while the dad stayed outside and pumped gas. And the dad was kind of looking around the town, and he looked at the man in the rocking chair, and he said, "Tell me, what kind of a town is this anyway?" Because he saw a sign that was all bent up, a parking sign. A door was just hanging on by a nail. You know, things looked kind of run down a little bit. And the man said, what kind of a town is this? And the Grandpa in his rocking chair said, "Well, where are you from? What kind of town have you come from?" And the man said, "Well, the town I come from, everybody was close together. They were always willing to lend a helping hand to their neighbor. They always said hello and thank you everywhere you went. I really hated to leave that town. It was a great town. We almost felt like we were all one big happy family." And the man in the rocking chair turned to the father and just gave him a warm smile and said, "You know what? That's a lot like this town. A lot like this town." Well, the family returned to the car and drove off. And they all waved goodbye and the like. And after the family was gone, the granddaughter looked up at her grandfather and said, "I don't understand. The first man came into town, you told him this was a terrible place to live. But when the family came to town, you told him it was a wonderful place to live." The grandfather looked down at his granddaughter's wondering blue eyes and said, "You know, it doesn't matter where you move. You take your own attitude with you. And that's what makes it a terrible place or a wonderful place." Isn't that the truth, though? You know, our attitude about things make all the difference in the world. We could choose to to love, or we could choose to hate and grumble for no reason at all. The question could have just as easily been, what kind of a church is this? Well, we've been looking the last several weeks at the book of Hebrews. You may remember that Hebrews was written to the church that was under tremendous pressure from the world outside, and many of the Jewish Christians were on the verge of abandoning their faith in Jesus and reverting back to Judaism. And so the author of Hebrews, Paul, exhorts them then to hold fast to their confession of Christ. And he writes to the church about the absolute supremacy and sufficiency of Jesus Christ as both the revealer and the mediator of God's grace. Hebrews encourages one to persevere in the faith because God is always with you. God is with you in the good times, he's with you in the bad times, and he's even with you in the in-between times of life. He's with you until the end, so hold fast, cling to your faith, and don't let anything come before it. In today's passage, the author of Hebrews then outlines 5 qualities of the Christian faith: brotherly and sisterly love, hospitality, sympathy, purity and holiness, and contentment. So I'm going to just briefly touch on each one of these characteristics, if you will, or each one of these qualities. So brotherly and sisterly love by the early church was oftentimes threatened by circumstances because of influences from the outside church. They took their religion seriously, and they desired to keep their religion pure and free from influence of the outside world. They would go heresy hunting, tracking down and eliminating any heretic and the person who had gone astray. And it was difficult for them to remember that Jesus came to restore relationships to God. Oftentimes in their desire for purity, they became stern and were unsympathetic in the treatment of other persons whose faith was weaker than theirs, who had failed in life. They probably couldn't see their own failures either. In their desire to keep the faith clean, they became harsh and unsympathetic, so brotherly love began to disappear. You know, when sisterly or brotherly love disappears, the situation becomes much worse than what it was in the beginning. It becomes worse than what they were trying to avoid. There are always those who can show brotherly love, however. Brotherly love and hospitality go hand in hand. The author of Hebrews writes that to be sure and show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels without even knowing it. You know, when you entertain strangers that you don't know who they are, or where they've been, where they're from, or perhaps even where they're going, or what they have done. But when you do, you just might be in the presence of one so great. You might be entertaining a pauper or a king. You might even be entertaining God himself. Whenever I think of this passage, I'm always thinking of the undercover boss who went into a business that he owned, and he was working with employees who didn't know who he was because he was in disguise. And he could see everything about those individuals. Some he chastised, some he rewarded. You may remember that one day an angel of God appeared to Abraham and Sarah and gave them a message that they would soon have a child, a son, Isaac. And they did when they were along in years. Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90. they had a son they called Isaac. Isaac's son Jacob had a dream one night, and when he awoke, he discovered that he had been in the presence of God, and God had blessed him. He'd wrestled with God all night long. I find it interesting that when God appeared to people, it wasn't always in a building. Oftentimes it was outside, out in his creation. The early church met outside or in small groups in people's homes, so homeowners were able to practice this idea of hospitality. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism and the Methodist Church, didn't have a church because he was kicked out of it. He was going to be the priest in the church where his father had been the priest. And they kicked him out of the church because they didn't like what he was saying. And so he walked right out the church door. They had a graveyard right outside the church door. His father's tomb was right outside the church door. And Wesley stood on top of his father's tomb and he said, "The world is my parish. The world is my parish." The world, he could go anywhere he chose to go. He didn't need the church. And Wesley did. He turned the world into his parish. He began ministering to the sick and the dying in the streets, and to the homeless, and to the hospitals, to the prisons, to visit the outcast and the downtrodden, to show them God's hospitality and love. He built a church on outcasts. The idea of hospitality is to put guests' comfort ahead of your own comfort, so that they may feel like they're in the presence of God himself. We are to practice hospitality among ourselves as well, to anticipate someone's every need for comfort. Have you ever seen where we do something and someone gets themselves in a huff because they don't like this? Well, that when that happens, that part of the service isn't for you. That part of the service is for someone else. In those moments, you need to be gracious and you need to practice hospitality. Hospitality was a big thing to the ancients. It meant that you would treat another person even better than you would treat yourself. You would anticipate that guest's every need in order to make them feel comfortable at home. Have you ever thought about how hospitable the church is? What do you think? Try to put yourself in a stranger's place that has come here for the very first time. If they're in a wheelchair or have mobility problems, how do they know where to enter the building? Are there signs directing them to which entrance to use, where they could come in? When are there parking spots for them? When they come upstairs, are there greeters to welcome them? Well, Carol's an excellent greeter. She welcomes people in. She's the first person they speak to. And what she does is so important in the life of the congregation. And she can help them find a place to sit. She can show them hospitality as a greeter and make them feel comfortable. Her role in the life of the church is ever so important. She creates that first impression when someone comes in. Well, if they have to use the restrooms, how do they know where the restrooms are? How would you feel if you were a stranger in a foreign land or a building and you had to use the facilities and you didn't know where they were? You sit there and squirm a little bit and finally get up and go on a search. For the early church, it was offensive not to show hospitality. To not provide hospitality, you were saying, I don't care about you. The heck with you. Go to blazes. I don't care about you. Is that the message we want the church to send to others? I don't think so. When you show hospitality, you're showing the love of God flowing through you. And when you love and show hospitality, you get far more out of it than you put into it. The third mark of the Christian life is sympathy, putting yourself in another's place and trying to understand what they're going through. And showing sympathy, you can help bring about healing in someone's life. You really can. Make every effort to keep yourself pure and holy. Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure. God will judge the adulterer, we're told, and the sexual immoral. And the tenth, or the fifth characteristic, or the fifth quality, is to be content. The 10th commandment tells us, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor manservant, nor maidservant, nor his ox or his ass, nor anything else that is his neighbor's. Don't try to take it. Don't try to steal it. Don't try to get it any way you can. Hebrews goes on saying, do not be greedy. Keep your lives free from the love of money. Free from the love of money. You know, loving money more than anything makes it your God. Instead, don't make it your God. Trust in the Lord your God, who said, I will never leave you or forsake you. I will provide all your needs. And finally, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, your heart, the fruit of our lips that confess his holy name. Remember to do good and share with others. In doing so, you please God. You please God. You are loved so much more than you will ever realize. So now we're going to sing, if you'll join me, to sing a hymn and offer God our sacrifice of praise. And for you who are watching, have a great and blessed week. Amen.